In the wake of the Peterloo Massacre and the government clamped down on radicalism in Britain, an extraordinary turn of events rocked Parliament and the monarchy. The Queen Caroline affair culminated in the estranged wife and consort of George IV being put on trial for adultery. This prompted public outrage and inadvertently sparked the next chapter in the history of the radical movement in Britain. Our story begins in 1795, when George, then Prince of Wales, reluctantly agreed to marry his first cousin, Princess Caroline of Brunswick. The marriage was not destined to be a happy one. The couple reportedly only spent 2 nights together before separating, but in that time conceived a child, Princess Charlotte. On the 30th of April, 1796, George wrote to Caroline, "Our inclinations are not in our power, nor should either of us be held answerable for the other, because nature has not made us suitable to each other." George even agreed to Caroline's request that in the event of the death of Princess Charlotte, she would not be obliged to engage in a connection of a more particular nature to conceive another heir to the throne. After living separately from George for 18 years, Caroline left Britain for mainland Europe in 1814. By the summer of 1818, separation was no longer enough for George, now Prince Regent. So Lord Liverpool's government established the Milan Commission to look for grounds for divorce. In particular, the commission was tasked with finding evidence of Caroline committing adultery while abroad. This material, however, would not reach Parliament for a few more years. On the 29th of January, 1820, King George III died at Windsor. George and Caroline were now king and queen. However, negotiations between the king, Parliament, and Caroline to maintain an amiable separation were unsuccessful. Caroline returned to England on the 5th of June to claim her rightful place as wife and queen. A day later, a message from the king was delivered to the House of Lords, with bags of evidence from the Milan Commission sealed in green bags. The king thinks it necessary, in consequence of the arrival of the Queen, to communicate to the House of Lords certain papers respecting the conduct of Her Majesty since her departure from this kingdom, which he recommends to the immediate and serious attention of this House. A secret committee was appointed to examine the evidence gathered as part of the Milan Commission. It delivered its report the following month. Without divulging specific details, the committee concluded that the Milan documents contained allegations that deeply affect the honour of the Queen, charging Her Majesty with an adulterous connection with a foreigner. The man in question was Bartolomeo Pagami, a member of the Queen's staff. The committee recommended a solemn inquiry. The next day, a bill of pains and penalties for an act to deprive Caroline of the rights and title Queen Consort and to dissolve her marriage to George had its first reading in the House of Lords. The bill specifically claimed that a most unbecoming and degrading intimacy had occurred between Pagami and Caroline. While the bill began its passage through the Houses of Parliament as normal, at its second reading in the House of Lords, the proceedings took the form of a trial to establish if the allegations against Caroline were true, with witnesses called and cross-examined. Throughout the trial, which took place between the 17th of August and the 6th of November, the personal details of Caroline's life in Europe were forensically examined in front of members of the House of Lords, all of whom were required to attend the proceedings. Witnesses described the Queen bathing with Pagami and the pair kissing and holding hands in public. Caroline's defenders, headed by the lawyer and MP Henry Broome, suggested that the witnesses had been bribed. Caroline was immensely popular with the public, and the attempt to strip her of her rights as a wife and a Queen consort struck a chord with the radical movement. This was taken as yet another example of the unfairness and cruelty of the political establishment, and seized upon as an opportunity to bring down a corrupt government. During the course of the trial, and in the months that followed, hundreds of petitions in favour of Caroline were addressed to both Houses of Parliament, and the radical press lampooned proceedings in satirical prints and pamphlets. Caroline's lost rights became associated with the people's lost rights, and the Queen became an icon of the oppressed. While many of the expressions of support for the Queen were no doubt sincere, many were also motivated by an intense dislike of the King, who was widely regarded as selfish and extravagant, character traits thrown into stark relief by the economic distress felt by the poorer members of society. In standing up for Caroline's rights, it was also possible for radicals to attack the establishment while avoiding the usual charges of being subversive or anti-monarchical. After the trial, a second vote was taken. It passed by 119 votes to 94. But at the third reading, that majority shrank to just 9. Sensing defeat, the government abandoned the bill. Despite this victory, which was greeted with scenes of jubilation across the country, Caroline continued to be snubbed by the king. The rightful queen was refused entry to George's coronation in Westminster Abbey on the 19th of July, 1821, and was even denied entry to Westminster Hall where other guests had gathered. Caroline died less than 3 weeks later, having fallen ill not long after the coronation she had been barred from attending. In her will, she specified that her coffin plate should read, "To the memory of Caroline of Brunswick, the injured Queen of Britain." But even this final wish was denied. While radical agitation on behalf of the Queen had subsided after the trial with surprising suddenness, perhaps in part due to the lurid nature of the charges laid before the Lords, the affair re-energised a radical movement that had been reeling from the oppressive legislation passed in the wake of the Peterloo Massacre and the Cato Street Conspiracy. The affair also had an important role to play in emboldening women reformers. As Anne Cobbett wrote, "It is not of little credit to our sex that all the reformers have ever been able to perform in the work of years to shake the present system has almost failed, but been completed by a woman at last." As Professor Anna Clark explains, if Peterloo helped produce a sense of class consciousness among the working class, then the Caroline affair provided a platform for women to organise and assert themselves in society and be taken seriously.